In the next 10 minutes or so, I will do my best to share with you a summary of the report exposing the financial flows into illegal Israeli settlements, the main findings, analysis, and recommendations from this joint report, which was published last year in September of 2021 by the Don't Buy Into Occupation Coalition, which consists of 27 Palestinian, regional, and European organizations. Before I go into the details of the report, I thought that it might be useful to briefly share some parts of the methodology that we used in the research and writing process. To start with, the geographic scope of the research focused on the occupied West Bank, including the eastern part of occupied Jerusalem, and the financial institutions based in 27 European Union member states, in Norway, as well as in the United Kingdom. As for the selection of the business enterprises identified throughout the report and that are involved in settlements, we relied on the list of activities that was used in the UN database of businesses involved in Israeli settlements. This UN database was established by the UN Human Rights Council and later published in February 2020 by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The business enterprises that we identified were then screened for financial relationships with European financial institutions between January 2018 and May 2021. Of course, in our assessment and criteria, we relied on the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, as well as the broader principles and instruments of international law. It is, of course, important to remind, before we go into the details of the report, that under international law, Israeli settlements, their maintenance and expansion are illegal and comprise a number of violations, grave breaches, and acts that amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is well reflected in the report's legal analysis, which is also in concert with the cumulative recognition of Israel's apartheid and persecution of Palestinians, evidenced in their segregation and fragmentation, and in Israel's discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, including forcible transfer and displacement, as we all witnessed yesterday in Sheikh Jarrah. And this is embodied in the overall settlement enterprise. As for the main findings of the report, the Don't Buy Into Occupation report found that between January 2018 and May 2021, there were 672 European financial institutions, including banks, asset managers, insurance companies, and pension funds that had financial relationships with 50 business enterprises that are actively involved with Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, including the eastern part of occupied Jerusalem. During this period, $114 billion was provided in the form of loans and underwritings to these 50 businesses identified. In the slide in front of you, you can see the top 10 European creditors to these 50 companies. You can see BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Barclays, Societe Generale, and the other 5. In the same period as well, and as of May 2021, European investors held $141 billion in shares and bonds of these 50 companies or businesses that were also identified in the report. In this slide before you, you can see the top 10 European investors, including the Government Pension Fund Global Norway, Investor RB Sweden, BPCE Group in France, Crédit Agricole France, Deutsche Bank Germany, and the others. The report also looked at 3 main case studies and the details of their involvement and the creditors and investors for these. To start with, BNP Paribas, which is domiciled in France, is Europe's largest bank by assets, and it was identified to have been the biggest European creditor to 27 businesses out of the 50 identified in the report, at a total worth of about 17 billion US dollars. The second case study of Booking.com was, which is a company that is a brand or a branch of Booking Holdings based in the United States. Booking.com itself is incorporated in the Netherlands and was listed in the 2020 UN database for its marketing and enabling of the listing of accommodation in illegal settlements across the OPT. The company essentially profits from listing property and homes that were unlawfully appropriated, seized, and expropriated from Palestinians. The report, the Don't Buy Into Occupation report, found that Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, HSBC, and Standard Chartered provided 590 million US dollars in loans and 1.6 billion US dollars and underwriting services to Booking Holdings between January 2018 and May 2021. It also found that the four largest investors in Booking Holdings are BPCE Group, Janus Henderson, Crédit Agricole, and Government Pension Fund Global Norway. As for the third case study, which is of Heidelberg Cement, headquartered in Germany, and through its subsidiary Hansen Israel, it has been unlawfully exploiting the Palestinian stone reserve and resources for nearly 14 years now, particularly in the village of Al Zawiya. In the picture in front of you, you can see the quarry or parts of the quarry in Al Zawiya. The exploitation amounts to the crime of pillage and the destruction of resources and other serious violations under international law. The report found that Deutsche Bank, Danske Bank, BNP Paribas, and Crédit Agricole are some of the key creditors to Heidelberg Cement in Europe, providing 8.4 billion US dollars worth of loans and underwriting services. Deutsche Bank, Deca Group, and Crédit Agricole are also among Heidelberg Cement's three largest investors in Europe. All of these case studies, the three case studies of BNP Paribas, Heidelberg Cement, and Booking.com, have failed to align themselves with international standards, human rights, the UN guiding principles, and the OECD guidelines. In reality, these three, but also many other private actors, whether Israeli or multinational, unfortunately continue to pump and generate billions in profit from the Israeli settlement enterprise that feeds off the dispossession and oppression of the Palestinian people. Businesses and financial institutions bear a responsibility under international human rights and humanitarian law. Those that are directly and indirectly involved in an illegal situation like that of the settlements, illegal Israeli settlements, whether by financing, insuring, trading, supplying, or others, run a high risk of being involved in grave violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, including by facilitating and or contributing to them through their financial activities and relationships. As outlined in the recommendations of this report to financial institutions and business enterprises, they must conduct enhanced human rights due diligence to prevent and mitigate those risks. When the business is not able to mitigate those, they should immediately and responsibly disengage and cease all activities and relationships in such a context. Banks and pension funds that are providing the large sums of money for these businesses should also use their leverage and ensure that companies they invest in are acting responsibly and in line with international law. When they are not, they should immediately divest from them and terminate the relationship. Businesses and financial institutions cannot continue to follow the lead of the occupying power in legitimizing and normalizing the pillage and the destruction of Palestinian resources, and in exploiting Palestinian wealth and labor force, and in imposing a captive market and subjugating and coercing Palestinians into an economic dependency for the ultimate purpose of asserting colonial domination. Last year, there were two very positive examples coming from Norway of the KLP and the Norwegian government pension fund Global, who took up the responsibility by excluding 19 companies and banks within their portfolios that are involved in or with Israeli settlements. As for the European governments and local authorities, the report presents a list of 16 recommendations. Obviously, I can't go through all of these 16 recommendations, but for example, one of them calls on European governments to ban trade with illegal settlements and to prohibit the import of settlement products and services into European markets. These are part of positive and customary obligations of third states under international humanitarian law. And lastly, in order to influence financial institutions, businesses, governments, and authorities, it is very important that we work together as NGOs, associations, trade unions, and civil society, especially in the absence of political will by states to take the necessary actions. Trade unions have long played an imperative role in standing up against oppression, racism, and injustice around the world, including in Palestine. So we therefore hope that trade unions will support the Don't Buy Into Occupation campaign, associated initiatives and activities, that they do raise awareness about the role of European banks and pension funds in financing illegal settlements in Palestine, and demand that these businesses and financial institutions stop contributing and being involved in war crimes and serious violations that are committed in Palestine, including those that are committed within the framework of the illegal settlement enterprise. We hope that trade unions will continue to call on governments and on businesses to ensure that enhanced human rights due diligence and environmental due diligence is carried out in relation to business activities and relationships in occupied Palestine, as well as other similar contexts of conflict and occupation around the world. You can find the full list of recommendations that the report provided, as well as the report itself, the case studies, and other resources available at the website don'tbuyintooccupation.org, which I believe has already also been shared in the chat box. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Maha.